Alright guys, Touchcover here back again today. Hope you're all enjoying your Friday and looking forward to the weekend. This weekend, of course, is the Atlanta home series. Want to go through some predictions for the weekends today. Tomorrow, wanted to talk about some storylines in the early morning, at least my time, before the event kicks off at 3 PM my time, which would mean 10 AM Eastern time and 7 AM even over on the West Coast. So, hope you're looking forward to the event. It should be a really exciting one. There's a few storylines, of course, that I will talk about tomorrow. The main one is Chicago versus Atlanta. Will they match up in the grand finals? Will they match up a little bit earlier? They are in different groups, so we have to hope that both of those teams make it out their groups without too much issue. In an ideal world, they will both top their group, and I think that's what I will be predicting in today's video, because it's difficult to predict otherwise. And, you know, in an ideal world, they'll top their group, and then they'll win their semi-final matchup. They'll match up in the grand final. That's what I'm pretty sure we all would like to see here, to see who's actually the best team in the game right now. It's pretty comfortable that Chicago are better than Dallas. They've proved that 3 times now. I think throughout the course of the season, Dallas have the potential to catch up, and, you know, we'll have to see. I do want to make a video in coming days, maybe over the next week or so, about, you know, Dallas, Chicago. At some point, will they catch up? What are the what's the future trajectories for this team? But Dallas aren't here this weekend. Atlanta are the big dogs. At least, you know, they're what considered to be either best team, second best team. It's really between them and Chicago right now for the crown. Hopefully that'll work out this weekend and we get a really exciting matchup. Like, if you guys enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, just an announcement here for the Atlanta home series this weekend. Team Insight is going to be Onyx, Paulex, Zaptier, Standy, and Venom, I guess. Thanks to Phobia for pointing this out to me. Also, this is the Seattle team. They're not playing here this weekend, but this was a scoreboard from a scrim where they were playing up against the Atlanta FaZe team, of course. Look at these engagements out of the side of a BZ. 45 deaths, pretty unbelievable levels of engagements out of these guys, but Octane goes double positive, and Panda isn't too far behind him. Azir K, 47 kills, unprecedented stuff. Octane and Panda, I actually saw on Twitter yesterday that apparently Panda is like a childhood friend from school of Octane, which I actually wasn't aware of before. If that is indeed the case, that's really, really cool to see. Panda here, of course, on the main squad, slaying out. Obviously, it's a scrim, who really cares? We'll have to see how things go when they get to a proper event. I imagine they are playing in the Los Angeles home series in a couple of weeks' time. Let's get right into it then. So this is what the group play schedule looks like for tomorrow. So these are your 8 teams: Minnesota Rocker, Paris Legion, London Royal Ravens versus the Florida Mutineers, Chicago Huntsmen, Toronto Ultra, and Atlanta FaZe, OpTic Gaming, Los Angeles. So these are the first 3 matches. I imagine they're running this in a similar sense, where these first 3 matches are run by kind of a different production team. It's not full on. There's no like desk host. I imagine this is what they did in London as well. In the early morning, the first 3 series, they didn't have a desk, and maybe it was the first 2 series rather than the first 3, but anyway, then they put the desk on for the series, you know, the featured series, I suppose. This Game Fuel marquee match, as they describe it here. So 3 PM, that's my time over in the UK. If you guys are in Central Europe, that'll be 4 PM. If you guys are in the States, as I said, 10 AM on the... No, it's 10 AM. Yeah, that does work out. On the East Coast, 7 AM indeed over on the West Coast. Pretty remarkable. So regardless, let's hop right into it here. This is what the opening matchups look like. There's also this to look at as well, which I think is pretty telling over on the Gamepedia website. London, Florida, Atlanta, OGLA, Minnesota, Paris, Chicago versus Toronto. These are the 2 groups. Just to run down the format very, very quickly, this is a GSL, a global StarCraft League type format. Effectively, double elimination within the group. If you win 2 series before you lose 2 series within the group, you make it out into the semi-finals, and from there it's just single elim. 1 series decides it all. Semi-finals, and then the finals, and they're your champions. And depending on where you place, first, second, 3rd/4th, 5th/6th. Honestly, that's such a tongue twister. But 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, you get a certain amount of points towards your overall standing in the league. Over the course of the season, the top 6 teams, I'm pretty sure it's the top 4 guaranteed, and then of the next 4, they have like a wild card kind of playoff type thing. They'll get to go to the World Championships, as it were. So only the opening event in Minnesota actually is the event where every single team in the entire game is going to be there. Let's go through some predictions then. So I did also bring up this, which is the participants, in effect the rosters. Because I'm sure some of you guys, and even myself, sometimes I find it difficult to bring all the players on a specific team to memory on demand, as it were. Toronto, who are there this weekend? I'm messing up all my words today, but anyway, we'll just keep on regardless. Methodz is not on the team anymore to our understanding. They brought Banton off the substitute bench, but they haven't listed the participants yet on Gamepedia for the Atlanta event, because who knows, they could make a substitute change that we're not aware of. It's possible that OGLA turn up with Gunja, and that would be perfectly valid. But we're going to talk about as if they're not going to do that. So these are the rosters. I'll be referring to these throughout the video. Let's start from the top left then. London versus the Florida Mutineers. Really interesting matchup, to be honest, because London have had some good results so far, but have been kind of up and down. They have probably showed more promise than Florida. Florida, of course, only played on that first Minnesota weekend. They went Game 5 with LAG. I think they went Game 5 with Seattle. They beat Seattle, lost to LAG. So 2 Game 5s. We did see 10 maps worth of them. They looked kind of decent, but they haven't really shown anything against a really, really good team. However, London, they've had an up and down showing. They got absolutely smoked by Paris on that opening weekend. However, they haven't had some other good performances as well. They beat the New York Subliners, of course, on the opening weekend, and again in London when they did the reverse sweep up against the Dallas Empire. They got reverse swept themselves, but definitely keeping it close with Dallas Empire is pretty impressive given the caliber of team we expect them to be, and they pretty much are right now in most people's estimations. Very difficult one to call given how little we've seen from each of these teams. Personally, I'm going to give it to London. Maybe a little bit of bias. Apparently, Florida have switched up their roster as well. So, well, not their roster, but they've changed up the roles. I believe Morks was running main AR and Skies was like 4th sub. Right now I believe they've switched it. A couple of people I think pointed that out to me on Twitter. So it looks like Morks is going to be the 4th sub and Skies is main AR. Have to see how that influences their play, by any means in the coming weekends. Then we've got Atlanta versus OGLA. Really interesting, really interesting to see OGLA back in action. They haven't had a great start. They got smoked by Paris. They lost to Chicago on the opening weekend. Haven't seen them since then. Atlanta, of course, similar deal. Haven't seen them at the London home series. They beat the Empire and whoever else they beat. New York Subliners, I believe. So they lost the domination actually in that Subliners match. So going to be interesting to see. However, after they lost that domination, they came back and absolutely stormed them on the map 4. In my opinion, Atlanta are going to take this one. I think it's a 3-0 or it's a 3-1. I don't think it should be too close. I think personally Atlanta on home soil, this is where they should be at their best. It's time to turn it into results, right? Like this is where you've got to start doing it, especially at your home series. OGLA not looking like the strongest team right now. Personally, I think give them 3 months, they might be one of the top 5 teams in the game. But for my estimation in the current time, they're not anywhere near as good as what we've seen from Atlanta. But as Bryce was saying on Spitfire the other day, there's an element of faith behind believing in Atlanta, which you can't have if you're supporting Chicago. Chicago, they're one of the top teams, probably top 2 teams in the entire game. Atlanta, to some degree, you have to be like, are they actually that good? We've only seen 2 series out of them. We've seen all this stuff online. The series they have played, of course, looked very, very impressive indeed. But, we'll have to see how it goes this weekend. Personally, Atlanta over OGLA is my prediction. I'm sure a lot of you guys are in the same boat. So, going on to Group B, Minnesota versus Paris, the first weekend, or first match of the weekend in Group B. These are the matches, these are the rosters we're looking at. Paris Legion is over here, these 5, and then the Minnesota Rocker is these 5. For some reason, I have a good feeling about the Minnesota Rocket here. I just really like the way this team is comprised, but I do recognise that Kismet right now has been on fire. Him up against a Seam, maybe a pretty one-sided matchup. And then you've got Dens and Shocks who have been honestly on fire as well. But Assault I expect to perform well. GodRx I expect to perform well. I think this can be a really, really close matchup. I'm expecting to see a Game 5 here. In theory, Paris should probably be favourites given they have shown, I guess, greater performances over the last couple of weeks than we have seen out of Minnesota. Of course, Paris played pretty well at the London event, but we'll have to see. My opinion, I'm going to take Minnesota in a Game 5 here, but I think it's going to be really, really close. And, it's tough to call upsets, right? But this is a really, really close call, as is London, I suppose. Chicago versus Toronto, don't really want to dwell on this too long. I imagine Chicago are going to come through here 3-0 winners. I'd be surprised if they lost more than one map at least. Yes, they did lose both hardpoints to Paris at the London home series, but Chicago Search and Destroy has been so dominant that even if it does go to a Game 5, I'm going to back them at the current time. So that's who I imagine will get through. Then we've got London versus Atlanta. I imagine Atlanta will win that. If I'm predicting them, look, I'm predicting Atlanta to go all the way to the grand finals. I've got faith in this team. I think they're pretty ridiculous on paper. What Simp brings to the table and what Crowder has behind the scenes as well, and all of the coaching and analysis staff they've got behind them, I think they've got great potential on home soil as well. Atlanta versus London in London may have been a different story, but here I'm expecting Atlanta to go through. Then I guess if you could consider the losers bracket, who is going to come out of losers, because that would mean that Florida drop down to play OpTic. Difficult to say who gets through that. Kind of tempted to say OpTic just to say that they'll at least get some decent result here, and then they'll be up against London. And in that case, I think that London probably gets the edge on them. So I think Atlanta comes out first place, London comes out second place out of Group A. Then if we look at Group B, a similar thing. Chicago's going to go all the way. They're going to beat Minnesota. And then Toronto are probably going to lose to Paris, but it could be difficult to call. So then it's going to be Minnesota versus Paris again. I actually wouldn't be surprised if second time Paris gets the better of Minnesota, but given I said Minnesota are going to win the first time, let's just roll with that prediction and say Chicago comes out first, Minnesota comes out second. So then the semi-finals would be Chicago versus London and Atlanta versus Minnesota. I think that Atlanta beat Minnesota, not necessarily comfortably, but in maybe a 3-1 fashion. Minnesota I think are a great team, but right now I'm not sure they're going to be able to match up to the pace of Atlanta. It's going to be incredibly difficult for Atlanta to be stopped here unless you somehow slow their guys down, because you're not matching them for pace, let's put it that way. So Atlanta through to the grand finals in theory, and then Chicago versus London could be an exciting matchup. It was one that we were denied at the London home series when Dallas, of course, did that reverse sweep against London, but I do think the Chicago are going to be too strong for them here. It's tough to look another way, but it's Call of Duty, right? You can only be so sure about a series. This could easily be a game 5, because that weekend Wuskin was on fire, but the other guys, they didn't really perform to the level that maybe we expected them to. If we get some good performances from Dylan and Jerd here, those are going to be the key players, to be honest, in that SMG line up against the likes of Chicago and really fast-paced players like the guys on Chicago and the guys in Atlanta for sure. If those guys show up, there's potential, but otherwise, I imagine Chicago are going to get the better of them here, but it'll be interesting to see. Those are the key pieces for London. If they show up, there is possibilities, but on that basis, I'm going to say it's going to be Chicago from the winners and or from the top, Atlanta from the bottom. That's the grand final we're going to see. I would not be surprised at all if this happens. The real question is, what happens next? We only get one series here. Personally, I think Chicago have to have a good start in this series. If they don't have a good start, I think that Atlanta really, if Atlanta goes up 1-0, 2-0, something like that, it's going to be tough for Chicago to get back in the game. The key point here, I think, is the search and destroy, because Chicago have been so damn good at search and destroy so far this season, but so have Atlanta from what we've seen. Chicago, probably the best search and destroy team in the game. Definitely, you could argue it's their best game mode. Up against Paris, when they lost both hardpoints, they won both search and destroys 6-0, 6-1. That's incredible. But Atlanta, the guys on that team, they're no slouches in search and destroy either, right? This could be two titans locking horns here in the search and destroys. I think that game 2 search and destroy is super key. Whoever wins that, in my opinion, goes on to win the series, because it kind of sets the precedent in that sense. If Atlanta win those first 2 maps, I think it's going to be really difficult for Chicago to find a way back in the series. However, in a game 5 situation, I can see Chicago potentially getting the edge. My prediction is going to be a 3-1 for Atlanta in this grand final, but if it goes all 5, I can really see Chicago getting the better of them, because the crowd is going to be super intense. Probably will match up to what we didn't see at London, which we kind of wish we saw, was the London crowd versus kind of the green wall crowd, I suppose, that is now over behind the Chicago team. We're going to get that in spades, hopefully, if we get this grand final here in Atlanta. The home team, the FaZe crowd that are all there, but also the Chicago fans that's kind of dominated Call of Duty esports for so long. That can be super spicy in terms of the crowd environment. It's going to push Chicago on. It's going to push Atlanta on. It should be a pretty even matchup in that sense. But yeah, I'm going to take Atlanta just for my personal thoughts, but there is some faith involved there that Atlanta are going to be the best. I think that Chicago have shown some absolutely phenomenal performances here, but I just think Dallas aren't quite the team. The fact that they've beaten Dallas so consistently, I don't really think Dallas are actually so good right now. So Atlanta's going to be the real test. Really intrigued to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. Like if you guys enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.